Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. I'm Perryn Keys, joined today by Wilson Alexander, as usual, one of our LSU beat writers, and by Reed Darcey, who is back again, back for more fun, another of our LSU beat writers. We are here to discuss, obviously, LSU football, all the changes that are afoot with the coaching staff, people coming and going, players coming and going, and we'll throw in a little bit of LSU women's basketball as well. We are here every Monday and Thursday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. We are also here live on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Every Monday and Thursday live, and if you don't catch us live, you can catch us on that same YouTube channel after the fact, so please subscribe. Subscribe to The Advocate, please, if you would. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. And stay up to date with all the latest LSU headlines with our LSU newsletter. That's LSU football, men's basketball, women's basketball, gymnastics, soccer, softball, everything under the sun that's related to LSU. You can stay up to date with our LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter to sign up. We are brought to you today and every day by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL, financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. To learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com. Contact Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today. Gentlemen, we are here on Thursday to discuss all things LSU football. We were here obviously yesterday on Wednesday for an emergency podcast when the news broke. Brian Kelly cleans house. He gets rid of Matt House, Jimmy Lindsey. Who else? Kerry Cooks, the safeties coach, and Robert Steeples, the cornerbacks coach. In addition to several comings and goings in terms of player personnel. We are here to discuss it all. Gentlemen, how you guys doing on this lovely Thursday?
Surprisingly, not totally sleep deprived.
I was about to say, you're going to be very tired.
Wilson, I was hope, it was a long season. I hope you're enjoying some downtime, right when the season ends. I hope you're getting some rest and relaxation.
We were discussing this actually yesterday. We sort of forget every year. We've been doing this way too long. We should know better. We discuss this every year that, oh, okay, the season's over. It's time to take a deep breath. No, that's actually when the real fun begins, when you have coaches leaving, players leaving, and all that sort of stuff.
I know we're going to get into all of these things, but just maybe to start the show to show what happened in a 48-hour period, and I might even forget something. I'm just going to list it off real quick. What Please happened between the end of the bowl game and as we're recording this podcast. Mekhi Wingo declares for the draft. Brian Thomas declares for the draft. Zalance Hurd enters the transfer portal. Jalen Brown enters the transfer portal. LSU adds Austin Ausberry, an Auburn defensive back. And Brian Kelly fires Matt House, Jimmy Lindsey, Kerry Cooks, Robert Steeples. Am I forgetting something? No. Oh, sorry. And Harlem Berry commits.
Oh, that's right. Man, that was huge, was it not?
Yeah. It's been a wild 2 days around the LSU front of things. A lot of movement happening now that the season's over.
And before that, Dominick McKinley commits.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And then the bowl game and then all that.
Yeah. So it's been a good 72 to 96 hours. It's really been sort of almost nonstop when it comes to LSU football. It's not going to be over yet. So, Wilson, it's kind of a minor miracle that you're not sleep deprived. So we'll try to get you some rest. Hopefully everybody will comply. I doubt it, but hopefully everybody will comply. So first things first, where do we stand, Wilson, in terms of this thing has just barely gotten underway, but I think we would all probably agree that Brian Kelly did not wake up at 7 a.m. yesterday and decide to make these moves. He's probably been thinking about this for quite a while, and as such, he's probably been thinking about whom he might bring in to interview and possibly replace all these coaches. So let's just start with the defensive coordinator's job. What do you suppose may happen, and what are you hearing?
Well, a few names that have kind of emerged early on in this process as potential candidates and would be Blake Baker, the Missouri defensive coordinator, a former LSU coach in 2021, coached linebackers. Damone Clark often credited Blake with his sort of the jump that he took as a senior. Those two are really close, and Damone has often said he owes Blake a ton. And so he's an interesting candidate to look at. I think we could maybe circle back to him or I can just go on about this right now. The one thing is, in December, he signed a contract extension with Missouri. That's what Eli Drinkwitz said when they announced it. And there's a key word there that's signed. And so it's going to be interesting to see how, if he is someone who LSU is seriously pursuing, which I believe he's definitely a candidate for this. In 24/7 Sports even reported he's a leading candidate. Is that where is that at with the contract process? And because that would affect a buyout number and all of those things that could complicate some things in that scenario. But also, some other some other names that have been tossed around early. Jesse Minter, the co-DC at Michigan, has come up in conversations. Jim Leonard at Illinois, former Wisconsin DC, has come up. Lance Guidry, former McNeese coach, now at Miami, has come up. A guy with some Louisiana ties there, played at McNeese. And, so that would those are a few to maybe keep an eye on. I know there's definitely going to be more that come up in conversations, others that have been sort of thrown out there and put on hot boards and things like that. But those are some of the ones I've heard maybe early on. But again, it's really early, and we'll see exactly where Brian Kelly goes with this. We'll also see exactly what order he picks his coaches in. Does he go with the DC first and then kind of let that DC have some input into the rest of the staff, or does he just kind of assemble the staff as he wants it? That's going to be kind of an interesting thing to track as we go down the road here.
In terms of wish list, when we're talking about the LSU fan base, when we get into the secondary, there's one name and one name only. Maybe I'm being too presumptive there, but
I don't know if it's like when you talk about the fan base having a one name only wish list. There's some who we're talking about Corey Raymond here, and there's I don't know. I've seen it's Twitter comments, so what does that really indicate at all? But I don't think it's just like everyone being like, oh, we have they have to get Corey back, but it's a logical choice to bring him back in some capacity. Corey was often at least since I've been covering LSU, was just the DB's coach in general. I think in this situation, if LSU brings him back in, he would only be coaching corners, and then there would be another safeties coach. That's how Brian Kelly had it divided between Kerry Cooks and Robert Steeples, and that's what I've heard that would probably happen here if they go in that direction. But he is certainly on the radar, and somebody who could end up coming back onto the staff. We'll just kind of see how it plays out.
Reed, You've covered recruiting just a little bit for us, since you've come aboard. And Corey Raymond, obviously you remember when Corey Raymond was here, he was sort of the orchestrator or one of the main orchestrators of DBU. How useful would it be to have a guy like that back on staff?
I think it's big. He's the architect of DBU. When we think about
Corey Webster might have something to say about that.
Yeah. But, I guess he's one of them who sort of
he continued that tradition for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what's interesting to me about all this is all the names you mentioned. Most of them have ties to Louisiana, and I guess that sort of jives with Brian Kelly's overall approach to the program. When guys enter the transfer portal, the first thing we all look for is, all right, who are the guys who have some sort of ties to Louisiana? And when we look at coaches, it's like, have they coached here before? Are they from here? What kind of ties to the state have they had? And so I think Brian Kelly has really made a point since he's come here to hire people from Louisiana to really lock down that in-state talent. And if you look at the recruiting class coming in this year, most of the top Louisiana guys, almost all of them, I guess, are set to enroll at LSU, and that's big. That was really one of the questions when Brian Kelly was first hired here. Like, how would he do in the state of Louisiana? He's not from here. Is it a cultural fit? That whole controversy, I guess, that conversation. So I think it's interesting. We've seen him go after those Louisiana people, and it might inform some of the decisions he makes with the defensive staff.
So moving on to there may be other cornerbacks coaches candidates and safeties coaches candidates to come down the line, but for now we'll set that aside and go to the defensive line. There, at least at the moment, is sort of a leading candidate, but there's a bit of consternation as to whether that could all get orchestrated and worked out. Wilson.
Well, yeah, the name that has come up consistently in conversations with sources is Bo Davis, and he's the defensive line coach at Texas. he is somebody who often comes up when LSU is looking for a defensive line coach,
Former
which,
LSU
as
player,
we'll get into,
right.
Which, as we'll get into in a moment, has been a lot over the last decade. The thing is, he's at Texas and he's making reported $1 million a year at Texas.
Right.
Can LSU get him away from Texas on a contract that would probably have to top that?
Right.
When you've already now, have to commit $5.4 million in buyout money to these 4 coaches, and that number could maybe get pushed down if they get other jobs and through mitigation and all that sorts of things. But that's the starting number is $5.4 million, and for the moment, I think you have to assume that's what you have to pay. And that's on top of already other bunch of coaches' contracts. If you're going to promote Joe Sloan internally, you've got to give him more money if he ends up being the OC. You might have to give Cortez Hankton a raise in order to retain him and prevent teams from coming after him. And Brad Davis just got a contract extension, but that was a Joe Moore Award finalist. There's a lot of money going around here that has to be considered, and that's going to ultimately have to be a factor of some kind in the pursuit of Bo Davis, somebody who LSU would certainly love to have on this staff. He's proven what he can do as a defensive line coach in multiple stops. And look at Texas's defensive line this year was fantastic. And so while it would be a phenomenal hire, on paper and everything, and just look like a great land, there's a lot of money that's involved in this one in particular.
So, yes, there's a lot of money in this in particular, but this is a position. Listen, if you're Brian Kelly, you have to get all these right, and we'll talk about sort of the different kinds of components you want from the staff once it's all set and settled. But defensive line coach in particular, you and I talked about this once we got off the air yesterday about how LSU, this has been a position that's been in flux over and over and over again. Just in the calendar year 2023, there were 4 different defensive line coaches. Jamar Cain, who took them through spring practice. And then Jimmy Lindsey, who, of course, listen, it's not his fault that
but never even coached.
Right.
Never even coached a practice.
Right. Did not get the chance to coach the defensive line because of his health issue.
Which, let me add to that, he was at practices over the last month of the season, but he was never the full-time defensive line coach on the field.
Correct. Followed then by John Jancic, who had to sort of take over in an emergency role, and then they brought in Pete Jenkins mid-season, the old master, to sort of try to shore that up. And now. It wasn't just this year, though, that's been a position in a state of flux. Before the mics heated up, Wilson started going through this, and we remembered that it's been one person after another, but this actually goes a whole lot farther back than even I remember. Wilson, when was the last time, we've got it written down here, when was the last time that LSU had a defensive line coach that lasted more than 1 year for real?
And there's a caveat to this, what I'm about to say, in that I'm thinking guys who lasted 2 full calendar years, because there's some who were parts of 2 seasons, but they came in at the start of spring practice or in the middle of it. But you have to go back to Brick Haley, and his last year was 2014. It's
unbelievable.
He was the coach from those kind of late 09, I think, to 2014, and that was the last time that LSU has had continuity on defensive line. Since then. I'm going to try to recite this, and you try to read my handwriting and tell me if I'm wrong or not. I can just recite this. So after Brick left, Ed Orgeron was hired for the 2015 season, and he was still the defensive line coach in the 2016 season. But this is what I'm talking about, that caveat a minute ago.
Right.
He then gets promoted to interim head coach mid-season when they fire Les Miles, and he brings in Pete Jenkins to be his defensive line coach. Then you go from Pete Jenkins to Dennis Johnson. So Dennis Johnson served in the 2018 season, and he was going to be again the defensive line coach in the 2019 season. But again, one of those caveats, he blows out both of his knees, and they bring in Bill Johnson.
Right.
Bill Johnson is the defensive line coach of 2019. And then he's the defensive line coach in 2020. So that's kind of 2 years, but again, not even really, because he came in August.
It wasn't 2 full years because he wasn't expected to be the full time. Yes.
Yeah.
Dennis Johnson would have been.
Exactly.
And that happened during the summer, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then you go so then Bill Johnson leaves after the 2020 season when LSU had that abysmal defense and they overhauled that defensive staff. And then in 2021 was Andre Carter.
That's right.
He only lasts 1 season. Brian Kelly does not retain him when he comes in. And then you've got Jamar Cain, and then you've got this 4 people at least helping in some capacity with the defensive line in 1 calendar year. It's And that's basically, we're going into 2024. I mean, this is like pretty much a decade of this. Yeah. And it is something that whoever LSU hires, they've got to hire someone who they can keep around for. Let's just set the bar at 2 years,
It'd be nice.
Like 2 full calendar
Start
years,
with 1 calendar year, and then go from there.
A couple of full recruiting classes, because you had some guys there who coached maybe like 2 seasons worth. Like Bill Johnson coached 2 seasons worth, but like let's get they need to get a guy in there who's going to be 2 full calendar years with the recruiting element, and that's the thing that makes it so. Part of what makes it so critical is obviously talent development once they get in here, but they also need somebody who's just in place who can recruit that position back to a level of real strength. Because right now it's a little bit in flux, which we can get into in a minute, especially after Mekhi Wingo declaring for the draft.
Right.
LSU's got a question mark at defensive tackle right now.
Real quick, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's telling that we didn't even realize, the last decade what the position has looked like, until, we sort of really looked at it and dove into it. Has all that turmoil and all that, I guess, all that rotating of coaches, has it affected LSU on the recruiting trail in the last few years?
I mean, it hasn't helped anything, that's for sure. Obviously, LSU was able to get Dominick McKinley in this class, like you said a few days ago, and that was a huge land. But that was a lot of Frank Wilson and Brian Kelly, coming in on the in-home visit. They didn't even have a defensive coach at his in-home visit, and obviously other coaches are involved in that recruitment as well. But like that has certainly been a concern. It's someone who they've needed to be able to get a defensive line coach in there that was something that Brian Kelly was looking for when he hired Jimmy Lindsey, was someone who had proven chops recruiting in the SEC. And so he ends up hiring Jimmy Lindsey from South Carolina. And so that's something that has been a priority on the staff, because Perryn often says, you're of the mind that your defensive line coach is usually one of your better recruiters.
Right.
And LSU hasn't had one singular person in place for an extended period of time, like we're saying, for a while. So it certainly has. I don't know exactly how to quantify how much it's hurt, but I know that it hasn't helped anything.
In some ways, it hasn't hurt as much as you might think. But by the same token, now where it has, and it very, very, very much manifested itself this year. Reed, I'll get you to speak to this. Just it was very clearly. Where it hurt was very clearly on the field, that just in terms of execution and teaching and developing and things of that nature. Reed, anything you want to add just we all saw it, but anything you want to add on the play of the defensive line this year?
Before the season, we all thought the defensive line was one of the strengths of the team. And we thought that, I guess, the model of success for the defense would be its pass rush and its ability to penetrate the backfield and, get pressure on the quarterback. And so we thought, maybe there's secondary. There are a few question marks in the secondary. You bring in all those transfers, all those freshmen, all those young people. You might have to rely on them a lot more, but hopefully the defensive line and the pass rush can be so good that they can mask some of those problems in the secondary. Fast forward a few months later, that's not what happened. The defensive line, it was disappointing. There's a lot of talent, in that group between Mason Smith, Mekhi Wingo, Harold Perkins for sure as well. So they definitely underwhelmed, and I think a lot of it is due to the uncertainty at the D-line position coach. John Jancic, that's not his specialty, coaching D-line, and he was sort of forced into that role. And Pete Jenkins comes in midseason, helps out a little bit. But again, by that point, it was sort of the damage had already been done because he had lost to Ole Miss at that point.
Yeah, and also one thing just to remember, I guess, in terms of like in that Ed Orgeron era, like that was Ed's specialty, was defensive line.
Right. So
even though LSU had a few different defensive line coaches under him, he was always kind of in and around the defensive line and helping recruit that position. But that's not Brian Kelly's position. He's not defensive line. So it's now absolutely even more critical hire for him to make a really good defensive line hire. And obviously all of these are critical. Like we can talk for an entire podcast, and we have talked a long time and written about DBU not being what it used to be. So like they've got to get the right guys in there to be able to rebuild the secondary to a level that LSU is used to having. But that defensive line coach, getting some stability in there, because you don't have a head coach who is like a defensive line person like Ed was, it's an absolutely critical hire that's being made in this process.
And defensive coordinator is obviously going to be the critical hire because, as you say, Brian Kelly's an offensive guy. He's got to turn the keys over to somebody who he really trusts, who's going to get results. This is the LSU Sports Insider Podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. Please subscribe if you haven't already. If you would subscribe, please go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Subscribe to our newsletter, the LSU newsletter. You get that every day. Scott Rabelais handles that 3 times a week, but it's a daily newsletter. You get all the headlines delivered straight to your inbox. To sign up for that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday live on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. You can catch us there live. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us there on that same YouTube channel after the fact. So please subscribe there. If you don't catch us there, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. And as always, as we like to say, we are here brought to you today and every day by Champion Wealth Strategies. Please go to championwealthstrategies.com to find out more and plan like a champion today. Let's discuss this a little bit more in detail about why don't we stick just for a moment here with the defensive line, because as you guys mentioned, Mekhi Wingo declared for the NFL draft. On what day was that? I don't even remember which day it was now.
I don't know what day of the week. Together. I can tell you that it was January 2nd.
So what was that, Tuesday?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Tuesday.
okay.
Once especially once you get around the holidays and we're traveling for the bowl game, like I couldn't tell you what day of the week it was for about 2 weeks.
That's always the case for me for the holiday. Not to get off, but it's always the case. Somebody says, "Oh, hey, come by on Tuesday." I don't know what day Tuesday is. Tell me the 2nd or whatever it is. So anyway, so Mekhi Wingo declares for the draft. Where does that leave LSU in terms of personnel on the defensive line? What they need and what they got coming back?
They've got to get Mason Smith and Jacoby Guillory to come back, because otherwise, then LSU is going to have to scramble for transfers. And it would be pretty behind on that. Yep. It is right now what you're looking at in terms of your defensive tackle personnel, interior defensive lineman personnel here is, Mason Smith. This is assuming he returns. He has not made a decision yet. He has until January 15th. Jacoby Guillory, same thing. Sean Washington, junior college transfer. Jalen Lee, a junior, transferred from Florida, did not play a whole lot this year, 2 tackles in 7 games. Right. Demirion Johnson, a 3-star incoming freshman, and now Dominick McKinley, once he signs in February, a 5-star incoming freshman. That gives you 6 defensive linemen on your team, and that is and that's with 2 guys who are still undecided. That's if they both come back. Right. If they both come back, then LSU at least kind of knows, like, okay, it's got Mason Smith and it really believes in Schoen, and Jacoby can be a depth piece. He's never really popped in his career, but at least somebody who's been on your team for a while. Go into
the rotation and give you some snaps.
Yeah, exactly. And so and then maybe you can bring Dominick McKinley along, and maybe he gets, or Demirion, and maybe one of them gets into the 2 deep. Maybe Jalen Lee takes a step, but so you at least know who you're just probably starting next year. But it still looks like a position that is a little bit of a question mark, even if that is the case. A little bit surprised that LSU hasn't gone a little bit more aggressively in the transfer portal at this point to try to find defensive tackles. It's hard to find really quality defensive tackles in the portal because exactly, they're in high demand. But that is kind of where it stands with Mekhi leaving. I think LSU really was hoping he would stay, especially after he was injured for the last little part of the season. But obviously, he ends up deciding to go, and I don't blame him one bit. I mean, he's going to be drafted. Right. He's probably going to be in that 3rd round, maybe even. We'll see kind of where he falls. His draft stock is going to be interesting because he missed part of the season, but he's had a lot of tape out there now, and he's going to be a drafted player. And if you're going to be drafted, especially on day 1 or day 2, I don't blame you. Once you get in that day 3 range, I'm usually sort of when a player leaves, I'm sort of are you sure? But I think he'll probably won't fall past day 2.
The other thing about Mekhi too, and we'll move on here in a second, but the other thing about Mekhi too is that the one thing that's working against him is something that he can't really improve on and fix, and that's his height. He's not a 6'4" towering guy. He's not going to grow 4 inches, between now and next year. In terms of tape that he's actually production that he's put on tape. For people to evaluate. I mean, his motor speaks for itself. His productivity has spoken for itself. So,
especially when you saw in that Wisconsin game in the second half, in the 4th quarter specifically, like the difference he would have made on this defense if he was healthy all year. And he wasn't. He was not. He was dealing with that core muscle injury really like for a while, because it was something he had surgery on in the offseason. And he said later how that didn't really get fully fixed. And so then it cropped up again after the Florida State game. And remember that first half of the Florida State game, he was disruptive.
Yeah, he was.
And then it was all of a sudden for the rest of the time when he was healthy, it was like, where's Mekhi? Like he's not making the difference that he had been in that first half of that game, and obviously he was dealing with that injury the whole time, and so gosh, it would have made a difference if he'd been healthy.
And I think real quick point, I think NFL teams are going to like the fact that he came back for the bowl game and really tried to play in that. And by all accounts, he's a great teammate, great leader. One of the top leaders on the program, so that's going to help him as well.
Some other movements. We obviously, no surprise here. Malik Nabers hits the road. Brian Thomas hits the road. That was the least shocking thing to happen over the past 96 hours, probably. But
Malik hasn't like officially put out a draft declaration or whatever, but he's gone.
He's gone.
His mom said he's gone. It's just a matter of when he's going to put out his graphic announcement and all that.
Right.
Kind of thing.
But there are some other comings and goings. Lance Hurd obviously was a big loss in the transfer portal, and Jalen Brown, who would have maybe been a contributor next year at wide receiver. Before we get to Austin and Ausberry, let's talk about these two gentlemen here.
You want to take this one, Reed?
Jalen Brown?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Zalance Hurd, it's tough. I think that's the good place to start, because Brian Kelly has done a really good job of keeping the offensive line talent in state. When you look at Will Campbell and Emory Jones, Zalance Hurd was supposed to be part of that mix, and obviously he transfers out. The transfer portal, it's weird. You don't know why he transferred. You don't know what his motivations are. It may be because he didn't have a direct line to playing time immediately, and he wanted to go play somewhere. It could be any reason,
Right.
But I think it's a big loss. In terms of the future of the offensive line, when you have those big 5-star offensive lineman tackles in state, you really want to keep them in and you really want to lock them down. So I think it's a big loss, especially for Brian Kelly, who really, likes to build the program through the offensive line and build the offense through the offensive line, which what he did back at Notre Dame. He had so many good offensive lines. So I think that's a big loss. Jalen Reed, receiver, I guess you've got Sheldon Sampson in that class, so he's going to be probably the main freshman guy. But again, you lose a guy who you got out of state, so that hurts your out of state numbers as well. So it's a crazy thing. People coming in, coming out. You're going to lose guys. When you look at a class, and I think you can look at this class for 2024. It's a fool's errand to be projecting it 2 or 3 years down the line, because the transfer portal is what it is right now. So many guys enter, so many guys. They enter, they come back, they enter, like we saw with Sage Ryan this year. So it's a crazy game, but it's the reality of college football. You're going to lose guys who you sign.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say with Zalance, I mean, that's the biggest loss that LSU's had in the portal to this point. It had been Sage, and then obviously, like you said, he comes back. Brian Kelly and LSU convinces him to come back, and he decides to stay. Zalance leaving. Brian Kelly had said that he was evaluating his role at LSU, and like you mentioned that the word role, like you mentioned, there wasn't next season a direct path to playing time, because if Miles Frazier comes back at right guard and Garrett Dellinger comes back at left guard, Miles Frazier this year secured his spot at right guard, and Emory Jones has been a fantastic right tackle, and Zalance isn't a center, which is the only position right now that's open on the offensive line, and so. If you've got 4 of the 5 starters coming back, you can see why in his mind, like, this is a guy who Brian Kelly told this story, like LSU was recruiting him and he said, I'm going to come in and play left tackle. And Brian Kelly's like, well, we've got a pretty good left tackle, Will Campbell. And Zalance's like, I'm going to play left tackle. Like, he's confident in himself, believes that he should be on the field. And he might not have been on the field very much until, his junior year. And maybe he didn't want to wait that long. NIL was also a factor here. It is often a factor these days. And what's just happening in college football all the time. And it certainly was in that situation as well. And with Jalen and how, that there was a receiver class that came in with Shelton, and Jalen was a top 100 guy, and Kyle Parker was in that class. But Jalen, he only played in 3 games this year. And maybe he's someone who can develop, and maybe he can go somewhere and get on the field a little bit sooner and maybe crack that rotation a little bit early. But he wasn't, Shelton was the one freshman who had cracked the 2 deep. And Kyle even played actually above Shelton in this game. In the ReliaQuest Bowl, and played a little bit more this year. And Jalen hadn't yet. He's a speedy guy. I'm sure he's going to have a fine career, but obviously he's looking elsewhere now.
Worth noting as it relates to the losses of Hurd and Brown, it is worth noting that LSU is set when it comes to at least to numbers. We don't know about talent necessarily, but LSU has signed 3 wide receivers in this class, and they have Xavier Thomas coming in as well. They signed 5 offensive linemen in this class coming in as well. Was it 6? I'm missing one then somewhere. I did this count while you guys were speaking. I was trying to count this up. So yeah, 6 line. They've got 4 linemen coming back. At least we think 4 of these 5 linemen coming back, in addition to a bunch of reinforcements. Hurd had probably enough talent to play, but his path was blocked. So another movement in another player having moved in the transfer portal, Austin Ausberry, safety, obviously son of Verge Ausberry. He did not play a lot at Auburn, but he's certainly coming in at a position of need. Anything you guys want to just sort of your 2 cents on that move?
It's another body in the secondary. He's somebody who's played some corner, he's played some safety, he's played some nickel. He has 3 years of eligibility left. So somebody who can be on the team now for a few years, and maybe he can develop into someone who is part of a piece of the defense. Like you said, he did not play much at Auburn at all. I think it's maybe 8 games in 2 years. But I think for him, the first thing that he would need to be focusing on is trying to get on the field on special teams and make a difference there. I don't expect him right off the bat to be someone who LSU is looking at as like a starter in the secondary. But maybe he can turn into that down the road. But at this point, it doesn't seem like that's what he's coming in to be.
We believe that LSU probably has one for sure starter at safety in Jordan Gilbert. Do they need to find another player, or do we know yet?
I think so. I think so for sure. And Wilson, you can back me up on this. You just need more people. With how it looked last year and the problems that were there, you can't. If a transfer is interested in coming, I think you can't really. You say, we don't really have a spot for you. I think you need as many people in there as possible.
Some of it depends on Major Burns and what he's going to do. That's another draft declaration we're waiting on, because he didn't have a fantastic season. He's got to get better at his angles to tackles. That was kind of the main glaring thing to me when I would watch him this year, was just pursuit angles. But he has now played a good bit of football. And if he were to come back next year, look, LSU fans might not love it, but he would be slotted in as penciled in as a starter, and maybe some competition could unseat him. But that's kind of where he would be, and so some of it kind of hinges on that, because otherwise, they are starting to build up some numbers in the second and at safety specifically, with Deshaun McBride coming in and Joel Rogers coming in. You've got Ryan Yates, a freshman who played in every game this year, and you've got. Well, gosh, is that it? I'm trying to remember exactly. Javian Toviano obviously has some experience back there. Kylan Jackson is a freshman who was injured a lot of this season, but it was a pretty highly rated recruit, and maybe he can be more of a difference maker next year. But again, that's asking a lot of young guys to take a step in a short period of time. And it feels like that is a lot of spots, especially on the defensive side, where you're trying to ask that of people. And that's why I think in particular it might be advantageous to try to get a safety, if you can find one that you like, to round out that room. And look, it could be something that, even if they don't do it now, maybe they do it post-spring. Andre Sam came in post-spring. He ends up being your starting safety.
Sure.
As a 7th-year transfer. And so, that might be a position that, especially once LSU gets back through the spring, we saw them add a few guys in the summer. And so it isn't done yet with the roster management and shaping this for 2024. Not even remotely close.
I would say the word of the day, or the word of the moment for the LSU defense is unsettled. Plenty of unsettled positions on the field, plenty of unsettled positions on the coaching staff. Before we wrap up today, Reed, obviously you've been covering LSU women's basketball from start to finish, and the LSU women begin SEC play on Thursday night, 8 p.m. against Missouri in the PMAC on the SEC Network. It's been anything but quiet during the non-conference part of the schedule.
It's been very eventful.
Just want to sort of reset everything for us with the LSU women.
All right, so we had a story up today where we sort of recapped everything that happened as part of the non-conference slate, because so much did happen. I guess just to run through it. You lost to Colorado. That was surprising. It was an upset. Kim Mulkey was upset at how the team really showed their effort, in that game, and she really made a point to call them out multiple occasions. So you've got the Colorado loss. And then Angel Reese misses those 4 games. And then you lose Samaya Smith to a season-ending injury. And then you lose Kateri Poole, who's no longer on the team. She was a key contributor last year. She started throughout the tournament. And then you beat Virginia Tech, which was a huge win. And then Angel comes back in that game, and then you breeze through the rest of your schedule to really, dominate a lot of teams. And now you start SEC play. They're ranked 7th in the AP poll. They started as preseason number 1, but they really held steady after they, fell to 7 after losing to Colorado. So I think, the reason that, we chose to highlight, this particular anecdote at the top of the story today, you should check it out. It was like before the season, there was an event in the PMAC for fans and boosters to attend. And what Kim Mulkey did was she sort of brought every player on the team up to stage and introduced them to the crowd one by one and shared a little anecdote about each player. And then when it was Angel Reese's turn to come up, she sort of looked back at the end of the national championship game from last season and what Angel said, post game, about her trash talk, about her, being unapologetically herself, about just going after Caitlin Clark and, playfully taunting her like that, and how she would face criticism for some of the things that she did post game. And what Kim Mulkey said was, if you love this team, if you love Angel Reese, you defend Angel Reese because she's ours, And so I think that informed a lot of how she handled the games at Angel Reese midseason, where she sort of struck that tone of, we have to defend her and we have to protect her. And so I think, there's some a little reporting in there about exactly what they did throughout the season, what the week after the Colorado game was like, what that first practice, that first film session was. And then there's sort of the emotions of the Virginia Tech game, where I think what I saw is it all really spilled out of them. It was Mulkey's 700th win. It was Angel's first game back, and they really bottled up the frustration and the tension of that first part of the season, and it was more of like a release, I think, where they sort of let out and channeled those emotions, in a happy, joyous way because they got that big win. So it's been a wild ride. It was way more eventful than I was certainly expecting, and so I think the stories never stop with this team, and I think it's only going to get more interesting throughout conference play.
Worth noting, I think everybody got a kick out of a wild moment when Kim decided to get herself thrown out of the game, and I'm choosing those words specifically. I believe she decided to get herself thrown out. It was Angel who was the first one trying to pull her back. So that was an interesting little exchange there. One other thing I just wanted to touch on was that LSU is sort of held steady at number 7. But they're going to have every chance, I think, to get themselves at the very least up to a number 2 seed, if not a number 1 seed, when the tournament begins. This has been a down year in the SEC, and it looks like it'll stay that way. South Carolina's net ranking number 1, LSU at number 16, but there's no other SEC team in between them. So I don't know. What do you make out of that?
There are no other SEC teams ranked in the AP poll. I believe the preseason there was 3 or 4, but Ole Miss fell out, Mississippi State fell out, A&M fell out. It's sort of you're right. It is a down year. One of the teams who was in that poll, I forgot, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. They had a couple big injuries to two of their best players, and on top of that, they played one of the toughest schedules in the country. They played a lot of really good teams, and so when you combine those injuries with the schedule they faced, they piled up a lot of losses, and so that's why they fell out of the poll. They've got the talent to contend with LSU and South Carolina, but they did lose Destiny Wells, one of their key contributors for the season, to a season-ending injury. So I think before the season, I thought it was LSU. Actually, I had them above South Carolina. It was LSU, South Carolina, and then Tennessee. What is Tennessee going to look like? I think that's a big question.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. It is a down year. The way it stands right now, the only ranked team that LSU has left is South Carolina. So at the same time, they could breeze through the rest of that slate, win games, but they could only have that game against one ranked team to really bolster their ranking in the AP poll and really get up there and try to be a 1 or 2 seed in the tournament. So it is a down year for the SEC, and it might change a little bit, but you're absolutely right. They're not going to face that tough of a conference late this year. It's kind of down for them.
It's been a wild ride through non-conference. It promises to be a wild 3.5 months to come, because it's always a wild 3.5 months to come. not only with LSU women's basketball, but obviously as we go down the road with LSU football and spring practice, and there are plenty of moves to come ahead. It's been a wild 96 hours for the LSU football program. Wilson, I don't, before we wrap up here, I was going to offer you, like, maybe if you wanted to just sort of pack up and sleep right here.
No, I don't think that
we'll shove you and wake you up on the next emergency podcast. We'll just get you.
Well, look, if they, who knows, man? That emergency podcast could be later this afternoon.
That's right.
So we're recording this on Thursday, late morning. It could be in, the way that things have gone lately, and if they move really quickly on a defensive coordinator, which, just to reinforce what we said earlier, like there's a lot of growing buzz around Blake Baker. I think that's probably the early name to know right now.
Right.
And we'll see if that actually gets done. But if it does, then it could happen here pretty soon, and maybe we'll be back here. And who knows exactly? I don't want to put a timeline on it and like lock ourselves into something that that would be incorrect. But
we didn't even.
They aren't sleeping over there, so we can't sleep yet.
We didn't even talk about the offensive coordinator. Kelly has to replace both its coordinators.
Yeah, that's again. There's plenty of this. It's been a wild 96 hours, and there's plenty of more moves to come over the next 3.5 months probably. What with player personnel as well. We will be here. I promise. We will be here. We might be sleeping right here, and then we'll wake back up and do our next podcast. We're here every Monday and Thursday. On all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Check us out live. If you don't catch us live, you can always catch us after the fact. If you don't catch us there, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Please subscribe to The Advocate if you haven't already, whether that's our print edition or our digital edition. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. While you're trolling around on theadvocate.com reading all our writers' fine work, you can subscribe to the LSU newsletter as well. You get all the headlines delivered straight to your inbox, to your desktop, to your phone. To do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are brought to you today and every day by Champion Wealth Strategies. Please, to find out more, please go to championwealthstrategies.com. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. For Reed Darcey, for Wilson Alexander, for Robert Young behind the glass, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.